Hello, my name is Aysha Dominguez, and for my book review assignment, I chose to do Silent Spring by Rachel Carson. I chose to do this book because in the United States today, pesticide use is still a major issue. Rachel Carson wrote her book in 1962, but a lot of the information is still considered really relevant. Uh, Recently, I've taken an interest in pesticides mostly due to the impact it's having on um, honeybees in the United States. And so I figured the book would be a good place to start and get some basic information on pesticides. Uh, sh- Rachel Carson starts the book with a fictional story about a town, and in this town the people are they're thriving. The farmers have great crop yields, animals are doing fantastic. Everybody is basically happy, healthy. It is the picture of utopia, basically. And then one day, stuff starts to slowly start dying off. Crops don't produce as much. Fields are dying. Animals are getting sick and dying. The humans are getting sick. And she uses this story as an example to show um, the chemical pollution effects from pesticides. Basically, pesticides are the evil that is causing the town to die. She also talks a lot about um, as she as you go into the book, she talks about the different types of pesticides. The third chapter is called "The Elixirs of Evil," and it goes through a pretty big list of different pesticides. Arsenic is one of them. Arsenic is currently banned in the United States, but some countries, especially China, still use it on their rice fields today. A big one she talks about is dichloryl diphenyl trichloroethane, otherwise known as DDT. This is a big topic in her book, so it's primarily the one we'll talk about later, just due to the amount of her discussing it in her book. She talks about how pesticides store in our systems, they store in our fat, which eventually can lead to diseases and cancer and um, cause other issues for humans. It gets in our food, it moves through the chain and ends up in our food. She talks about the effects it has on animals. The higher you go up the food chain, the higher concentrated the pesticide becomes, and so therefore it. She talks about how it kills off the animals that are higher up on the food chain. A big one mentioned that a lot of people know about is the bald eagle. And DDT had a big impact on their decline in the United States. She also talks about, towards the end of the book, more, she talks about alternatives that you can use in replace of pesticides. A big one is biological pest control. If you're not familiar with what biological pest control it is, that is basically bringing in another species to help take care of the pest problem that is affecting crops. Uh, for my analysis of the book, it's kind of a mixed review. When I read books on controversial topics, books or articles, anything that is controversial, I prefer to read stuff that is not really one sided. I like to see the pros and cons of everything. So for me, I had a hard time with this book because it is very one sided. You can really truly see that Rachel Carson is very passionate about the topic and she is very anti pesticides. There is no positive in her mind. So that was a hard one for me to kind of get past. Also, the way she writes at times is a little hard to understand exactly what she's writing. There were a couple parts I had to reread just because of her writing style, and it may not be an issue for everybody. But her writing style, and it is a little outdated because she wrote the book in 1962. Um, in her book, uh, she's definitely an advocate for biological pest control. And I grew up on a farm, so for me, that was something, we talked about growing up. We didn't really use pesticides. We didn't really have an issue with that, but we did talk about biological pest control, and there are pros and cons to it, um, which I don't feel she touches enough on the cons of biological pest control. She definitely talks about the pros. You bring in a species and it helps get rid of the pest so that the crops can grow and aren't destroyed. Uh, but often there can be negative side effects, one of them being then in the long run, you need to bring in another species to wipe out the one you brought in. And it's this repetitive cycle of trying to get rid of pests. Um, a really good example that a lot of people are familiar with is the Asian beetle was brought into the United States to help with the aphid problem for crops. And Asian beetles are great at getting rid of aphids. They consume a lot of different pests, actually. The problem with Asian beetles is they do not stay in one place. And so after they're introduced and they get rid of the aphids, they need to move to find more food. And they are great at migrating. So areas where the Asian beetle was not introduced now have large populations of Asian beetles. And most people definitely see them as a pest. They're very hard to get rid of. Um, Another thing that she talks a lot about DDT within her book, mostly because that's a very common one that a lot of people have heard of. It was first developed by a German scientist in the late 1800s. However, it wasn't until 1939 when Paul Mueller actually discovered that it could be used as a pesticide. And Paul Mueller actually won a Nobel Prize based on his scientific discovery and using it as a pesticide specifically for disease control, not necessarily for agricultural use. They used it during World War II to help fight off mosquitoes that carried malaria. And actually, due to DDT, there are many countries around the world that malaria is basically non-existent. And Rachel Carson doesn't really talk about that at all. And part of that could be um, when it was written, maybe that wasn't something that was discovered, that they realized that the effects of DDT did cause countries to not have malaria. However, on the a downside of DDT is it did drastically affect animal species, especially in like the United States with the bald eagle. Bald eagles were on the verge of extinction, basically. And then when DDT was banned for agricultural use in the United States, the bald eagles slowly, very slowly, started to make a comeback. I would have preferred to have seen her include some of the pros because there are a few. I would definitely say the cons outweigh the pros. However, I like to see both sides when reading controversial issues. I did a lot of extra research while reading this book to um, kind of compare some of her facts and find out more about it because I didn't feel she went into enough detail. And again, part of that could be it just when it was written. Um, DDT is pretty much banned throughout the whole world today for agricultural use. However, there are still countries that use it as a disease control in fighting malaria with the mosquitoes. Um, Also, throughout her book, she uses a lot of stories. Um, it's almost a little excessive. It, for some people, those stories are very helpful. If you are that type of person where having a book with lots of stories and anecdotes helps you to see the point and understand it better, this will be a great book for you. Um, for me, that causes me to lose interest in a book. Um, so there are a lot of stories. I do feel she could have left out, a nice handful of them, and she still would have been able to get her point across greatly. The book is filled with a lot of knowledge. You can really truly tell she's very passionate about this topic, and she really truly feels it is a great concern for our country and our world at that for that matter. Um, I did learn a lot of things about DDT on the negative side that I did not previously know about, um, as well as just other pesticides and how long they were actually around for. She gives the nice list of them in the third chapter, and so it's very interesting to see all that. I didn't know a lot of those pesticides even existed. Um, I If you're really interested in learning about pesticides and the negative aspects of it, this is definitely a great book for you. Um, I would recommend maybe finding an alternative source to go along with it, just so you do have comparing sides of it, because I feel that is very important when reading about anything. Um, when you're trying to learn about it, you need to have more than just one side of it. That is my really only big downfall with her book, is that she doesn't give enough of that other side for me to truly make an opinion on the topic. Um, but I did learn a lot about pesticides and um, DDT in particular, just because that seemed to be her main focus throughout the book. So yeah, I read it if you're interested in pesticides, and but again, please grab another source or two just to give you some comparison. And thank you.